The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical gear one final time. She had joined this joint operation as a combat medic, not expecting to be anything more than support personnel for the elite Navy SEAL team that had requested additional medical backup for their high-risk mission. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman buzzed with tension as Captain Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader, outlined their objective. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a remote compound nestled between two ridgelines in the Kunar province. The target was Ahmad Nazir, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces across the region. Maria listened intently as Morrison explained the terrain. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided natural cover for defenders. Satellite imagery showed at least 15 armed militants patrolling the area, with potentially more hidden inside the structures. The SEALs would approach from the north under cover of darkness, establish overwatch positions, and neutralize the target. What made this mission particularly challenging was the compound's location. Any helicopter extraction would be nearly impossible due to the high altitude and narrow valley. The team would have to complete their mission and trek several miles to a designated pickup zone. This meant they needed to move fast and avoid prolonged engagement with enemy forces. As the only female member of the operation, Maria had faced her share of skepticism throughout her military career. Growing up in a tough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she had learned early that respect was earned, not given. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. By the time she enlisted at 18, she could outshoot most of her male counterparts at the firing range. The Army had initially tried to place her in administrative roles, but Maria fought for combat training. She completed her medic certification with the highest scores in her class and volunteered for deployment to the most dangerous areas. Her colleagues had learned to trust her skills, but she still felt the weight of having to prove herself with every mission. Morrison assigned positions for the operation. The SEAL snipers would take elevated positions on the eastern ridge, providing overwatch and eliminating sentries. The assault team would approach from the west, using the cover of a dried riverbed. Maria would establish a casualty collection point halfway between the two positions, ready to provide medical support if needed. The team spent the afternoon reviewing maps and running through contingency plans. Maria studied the terrain carefully, noting potential cover positions and escape routes. Something about this mission felt different from her previous operations. The intelligence seemed almost too perfect, and the compound's defensive positioning made her uneasy. As evening approached, the team conducted final equipment checks. Maria packed her medical supplies alongside her M4 carbine and additional ammunition. She had trained extensively with various weapon systems, but her primary role remained medical support. The SEALs carried specialized equipment including night vision devices, suppressed weapons, and advanced communication gear. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the team fast roping into a landing zone 3 miles from the target. The pilot reported all clear as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving the team alone in hostile territory. The mountain air was thin and cold, making every breath visible in the night vision devices. Moving through the rocky terrain proved more difficult than anticipated. Loose stones and hidden crevices slowed their progress, and the team had to take frequent breaks to maintain noise discipline. Maria kept pace with the SEALs despite carrying additional medical equipment, earning quiet nods of approval from the team members. 2 hours into their approach, they reached their planned positions. The SEAL snipers, Petty Officers Davis and Chen, established themselves on the eastern ridge with clear lines of sight to the compound. The assault team moved into position along the dried riverbed, while Maria found cover behind a large boulder formation that provided protection and good visibility of both friendly positions. Through her night vision scope, Maria could see the compound clearly. The intelligence had been accurate about the layout, but something felt wrong. The sentries moved in predictable patterns, almost as if they were performing for an audience. The defensive positions seemed too obvious, and there were fewer guards visible than the satellite imagery had indicated. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece as he reported ready status from the assault team. Davis confirmed from Overwatch that he had clear shots on 2 sentries. The mission was proceeding according to plan, but Maria's instincts told her trouble was coming. She adjusted her position slightly, ensuring she had good cover while maintaining visual contact with both SEAL elements. Her medical bag was within easy reach, but she also checked her weapon one more time. Years of combat experience had taught her that medical personnel often became targets, and she needed to be ready for anything. The compound below remained quiet, except for the occasional movement of guards. A few lights flickered in the main building, suggesting the target might still be awake. The SEALs would wait for the optimal moment to begin their assault, timing their approach to catch the enemy at their most vulnerable. As Maria settled in for what might be a long wait, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. From the streets of Los Angeles to the mountains of Afghanistan, she had consistently exceeded expectations. Tonight would be another test of her skills and determination. The radio remained silent as the team maintained their positions. Each member understood their role and trusted their teammates to execute flawlessly. What none of them could predict was how dramatically the situation would change in the next few hours, or how Maria's unique combination of medical training and combat skills would become the key to their survival. The stage was set for an operation that would test every aspect of their training and reveal the true character of each team member under the most extreme circumstances. The first sign of trouble came at 03:47 hours when Davis reported movement in the hills behind the compound. Through his high-powered scope, he could see armed figures moving in coordinated patterns along ridgelines that should have been empty. The intelligence had been wrong, or worse, compromised. Morrison immediately called for a situation report from all positions. Chen confirmed additional movement on the southern approach, and the assault team reported seeing muzzle flashes in the distance. What was supposed to be a surgical strike against a lightly defended position was rapidly becoming a potential ambush. Maria felt her heart rate increase as she processed the tactical situation. The SEALs were potentially surrounded, with enemy forces moving to cut off their escape routes. Her position, initially chosen for medical support, now provided a crucial vantage point for observing the developing threat. Through her scope, she counted at least 20 additional fighters moving through the darkness. They carried automatic weapons and moved with military precision, suggesting these were not typical Taliban militia, but trained combatants. The compound below had become the center of a much larger defensive network. Morrison made the difficult decision to abort the primary mission and focus on extraction. However, the enemy had anticipated this move. Radio intercepts indicated that coalition communications had been monitored, and the Taliban had prepared a sophisticated trap. The first shots came from the eastern ridge, forcing Davis and Chen to abandon their overwatch positions. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions, creating a deadly crossfire that pinned down the assault team. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky as both sides engaged in intense combat. Maria found herself in an impossible position. The SEAL elements were separated and taking heavy fire, but any movement to provide medical support would expose her to enemy fire. She watched through her scope as Davis took a hit while trying to reposition, his body going limp behind his rifle. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. Chen was forced to move down from the ridge under heavy fire, leaving behind much of his specialized equipment. The assault team found themselves trapped in the riverbed, with enemy fighters on both sides preventing movement toward their planned extraction point. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos on the radio, calling for immediate medical assistance for Davis, but the route to his position was completely exposed to enemy fire. Any rescue attempt would be suicidal under current conditions. This was the moment Maria had trained for throughout her career, but no amount of preparation could fully prepare someone for the reality of combat decision-making. She could remain in her protected position and wait for the situation to stabilize, or she could risk everything to save her wounded teammate. Without hesitation, she grabbed her medical bag and began moving toward Davis's position. The rocky terrain provided some cover, but she had to cross several exposed areas where enemy fighters had clear lines of sight. Bullets struck the rocks around her as she bounded from cover to cover. Reaching Davis required a final sprint across 30 meters of open ground. Maria timed her movement with a lull in the enemy fire, but halfway across, automatic weapons opened up from a new position. She dove behind a boulder as bullets shattered the stone around her. Davis was still breathing when she reached him, but he had taken a round through his left shoulder and was losing blood rapidly. While applying pressure to the wound, Maria realized their position was completely surrounded. Enemy fighters were closing in from multiple directions. The radio crackled with reports of the assault team's status. 2 SEALs were wounded and their ammunition was running low. Chen was attempting to provide covering fire, but his position was also compromised. The extraction helicopter was still 20 minutes away, and the landing zone was now controlled by enemy forces. Maria made a quick assessment of their tactical situation. The enemy had successfully separated the SEAL elements and was systematically destroying each position. Standard military doctrine would call for establishing defensive positions and calling for air support, but no help was coming quickly enough. She noticed something the others had missed in the chaos of combat. The enemy fighters were moving in predictable patterns, following terrain features that channeled their movement. Their apparent advantage in numbers was actually creating coordination problems as different groups interfered with each other's fields of fire. While treating Davis's wounds, Maria began formulating a desperate plan. Her position provided visibility of most enemy movement patterns, and she had noticed a critical weakness in their deployment. The various Taliban groups were not communicating effectively with each other, creating opportunities for a skilled marksman to exploit. Davis regained consciousness as she finished bandaging his wound. He tried to reach for his rifle, but his injured arm made accurate shooting impossible. Maria realized that his high-powered sniper rifle, equipped with advanced optics and specialized ammunition, was now her responsibility. The weight of the weapon felt familiar in her hands despite its specialized configuration. Her father's early training and years of military experience had prepared her for this moment, but she had never imagined using a precision rifle in combat. The scope's magnification and ballistic computer were more advanced than anything she had used before. Maria studied the enemy positions through the powerful scope, identifying priority targets and calculating ranges. The tactical situation was still desperate, but she now had the tools to make a difference. The question was whether her skills would be sufficient to turn the tide of battle. Chen's voice came over the radio, reporting that his position was about to be overrun. The assault team was requesting immediate support, but they were too far away for effective engagement with standard weapons. The enemy was tightening the noose around all SEAL positions. Looking at Davis's pale face and hearing the desperation in her teammates' voices, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She would use the sniper rifle to systematically engage the enemy forces, buying time for extraction and potentially saving her teammates' lives. The first shot would announce her position to every enemy fighter in the area, making her the primary target for their counterattack, but it was their only chance for survival. Maria settled behind Davis's rifle, adjusting the scope settings and familiarizing herself with the weapon's characteristics. The advanced optics revealed details of the battlefield that had been invisible moments before. She could see individual enemy fighters moving between cover positions, coordinating their assault on the trapped SEALs. Her first target was a machine gunner positioned on a rocky outcrop, suppressing Chen's movement with devastating automatic fire. The range was 340 meters according to the scope's laser rangefinder, well within her capabilities but requiring precise calculation for the mountainous conditions. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger slowly, just as her father had taught her years ago. The rifle's recoil was substantial, but the shot was true. The enemy machine gunner dropped silently, his weapon falling among the rocks. The sudden cessation of automatic fire gave Chen the opportunity to move to better cover. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Muzzle flashes erupted from a dozen positions as fighters attempted to locate the source of the precise shot. Bullets shattered rocks around Maria's position, forcing her to keep her head down while they searched for her. Davis, despite his wound, provided tactical guidance. He identified priority targets and helped Maria understand the rifle's advanced ballistic system. His experience with long-range engagements proved invaluable as she adapted to the weapon's characteristics under combat conditions. Maria's second shot eliminated a Taliban commander who was, coordinating the assault on Morrison's position. At 280 meters, the shot required compensation for wind and elevation, but the result was devastating to enemy morale. She could see fighters hesitating and looking around nervously, uncertain where the deadly fire was originating. The tactical situation began shifting in subtle but important ways. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently now moved more cautiously, staying in cover longer and exposing themselves less frequently. This gave the pinned SEAL elements crucial breathing room to assess their situations and conserve ammunition. Chen reported that he had successfully moved to a better position and was engaging targets with his carbine. The assault team was still trapped, but no longer taking the overwhelming fire that had prevented any movement. Maria's precision shooting was disrupting the enemy's carefully planned assault. Her third and fourth shots came in rapid succession, eliminating 2 fighters who were attempting to flank Morrison's position. The specialized ammunition's effectiveness at long range was remarkable, and Maria began to understand why SEAL snipers were so highly valued in combat operations. But the enemy was adapting to her tactics. Small groups began moving in coordinated rushes, making themselves difficult targets while closing the distance to her position. She realized that her effectiveness was temporary, unless she could find a way to completely disrupt their assault. Maria noticed something crucial about the enemy's movement patterns. They were using a series of natural trenches and rock formations that channeled their approach routes. These terrain features, while providing cover, also created predictable choke points where multiple targets could be engaged rapidly. Davis pointed out a critical observation through his binoculars. The enemy had positioned a reserve force in a cluster of boulders approximately 400 meters away. These fighters were preparing to reinforce any position that came under pressure, and their elimination would prevent the enemy from adapting to losses. The shot to the reserve position would be the most challenging yet. Maximum effective range, multiple targets in a confined area, and significant environmental factors affecting bullet trajectory. Maria had never attempted anything this demanding, even in training scenarios. She studied the target area through the powerful scope, identifying individual fighters and calculating the optimal sequence of engagement. The plan required 5 shots in rapid succession before the enemy could react and scatter. It was an extremely ambitious goal for even an experienced sniper. The first shot at the reserve position caught the enemy completely off guard. A fighter who had been standing near the center of the group dropped instantly, causing immediate confusion among his companions. Before they could react, Maria's second shot eliminated another target on the group's left flank. The remaining fighters began diving for cover, but Maria had anticipated their movement patterns. Her third and fourth shots caught 2 more as they attempted to escape to better positions. The fifth shot was the most difficult, requiring her to track a moving target at extreme range while compensating for his erratic movement. When the engagement ended, the enemy reserve force had been completely eliminated. The psychological impact on the remaining Taliban fighters was devastating. They had watched their reinforcements disappear under precise fire from an invisible marksman, creating uncertainty and fear throughout their ranks. Morrison's voice came over the radio with the first positive report in hours. His team had successfully eliminated 3 nearby fighters and was preparing to move toward the extraction point. Chen reported similar success from his position, with enemy pressure significantly reduced. The tide of battle was turning, but Maria knew the most dangerous phase was yet to come. The surviving enemy fighters would now focus all their attention on finding and eliminating her position. She had become the primary threat to their mission, making her the target of their counterattack. Davis, despite his weakening condition, continued providing tactical support. He identified ammunition types and scope settings that would maximize her effectiveness against different target categories. His expertise in precision shooting was proving invaluable as the engagement continued. Maria could see enemy fighters attempting to coordinate a flanking movement that would approach her position from the south. Their movement was cautious but determined, and they were using available cover effectively. She would need to engage them before they could establish firing positions within effective range. The sound of approaching helicopters could be heard in the distance, indicating that extraction might be possible if the team could reach the designated landing zone. But that zone was still controlled by enemy forces, and reaching it would require moving through areas covered by hostile fire. The next phase of the engagement would determine whether her remarkable shooting performance could translate into successful mission completion. Every shot now carried the weight of her teammates' survival, and the enemy was fully committed to preventing their escape. The enemy flanking force had advanced to within 150 meters of Maria's position when she began engaging them systematically. At this closer range, her shots were devastatingly accurate, but the reduced distance also meant that return fire was more dangerous than ever before. Her first target was the squad leader, identifiable by his position at the front of the formation and his attempts to coordinate the advance. The shot eliminated him instantly, causing immediate confusion among his followers. Without clear leadership, the flanking movement began to falter as individual fighters sought cover. Maria shifted her aim to the next most dangerous target, a fighter carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The weapon posed a significant threat to her rocky cover position, and its elimination was critical for her survival. The shot was successful, but the explosion of the dropped munition alerted every enemy fighter to her approximate location. Automatic weapons fire began concentrating on her position with increasing accuracy. Bullets shattered stone fragments around her, and she was forced to keep moving between different firing positions to avoid being pinned down. Davis, despite his wound, helped spot targets and provided covering fire with his sidearm. The sound of helicopter rotors was growing louder, indicating that extraction was approaching. Morrison reported over the radio that his team was moving toward the landing zone, but they were still encountering resistance from entrenched positions. The extraction would only be possible if the landing zone could be cleared of enemy fighters. Maria identified the key positions that were preventing helicopter landing. 3 machine gun nests were strategically positioned to cover the flat area designated for extraction. Each position was well camouflaged and protected by natural terrain features, making them extremely difficult targets even for precision fire. The first machine gun nest was positioned in a cluster of boulders at 380 meters range. The weapons crew had excellent fields of fire over the landing zone, and their elimination was essential for extraction success. Maria studied the position through her scope, looking for any exposed area that would allow an effective shot. The machine gunner was partially visible behind his weapon, but the shot would require threading the bullet between rock formations that provided him with cover. It was one of the most technically demanding shots of her career, requiring perfect timing and trajectory calculation. Her shot struck the machine gunner center mass, causing him to slump over his weapon. The assistant gunner attempted to take over the position, but Maria's follow-up shot eliminated him as well. The first machine gun nest was neutralized, opening a portion of the landing zone. The second nest proved more challenging due to its elevated position on a rocky outcrop. The crew had observed the fate of their colleagues and were keeping strictly behind cover, exposing themselves only for brief moments to fire at approaching SEALs. Maria would need to time her shot perfectly with their firing pattern. She watched through the scope as the machine gunner prepared to fire another burst. The moment he leaned into his weapon, exposing his shoulder and head, she took the shot. The 300-meter engagement was successful, but the assistant gunner immediately moved to drag his wounded comrade to safety. Maria's follow-up shot caught the assistant gunner as he attempted the rescue, eliminating the second machine gun position. However, her prolonged engagement had given the enemy time to organize a more effective response. Multiple fighters were now converging on her position from different directions. The third machine gun nest was the most problematic, positioned behind a natural rock wall that provided almost complete protection. Only the weapon's muzzle was visible when firing, making it nearly impossible to engage the crew directly. Maria would need to find an alternative approach. Davis suggested using ricocheting shots off the rock surfaces to reach the protected position. It was an extremely advanced technique that required precise angle calculations and perfect bullet placement. The margin for error was minimal, but conventional direct fire was impossible. Maria studied the rock formations surrounding the enemy position, identifying angles that might allow indirect engagement. The technique required understanding bullet behavior after impact with stone surfaces, something she had never attempted in combat conditions. Her first ricochet attempt missed the intended angle, causing the bullet to fragment harmlessly against solid rock. The second attempt achieved better angle calculation but insufficient force transfer. The enemy crew remained unharmed and continued engaging approaching helicopters. Chen's voice came over the radio reporting that the extraction helicopter was taking heavy fire from the remaining machine gun position. The pilot was requesting immediate suppression of hostile fire before attempting to land. Time was running out for successful extraction. Maria made a desperate decision to leave her protected position and move closer to the enemy nest. At shorter range, she might be able to find a direct shot angle that would penetrate their cover. The movement would expose her to fire from multiple positions, but it was their only remaining option. Davis protested weakly, pointing out that her movement would likely result in her death and leave him completely defenseless. But Maria had already committed to the course of action. She gathered her medical supplies and prepared to move, knowing that this decision would determine the mission's outcome. The movement across exposed terrain while carrying both the heavy sniper rifle and medical equipment was extraordinarily dangerous. Enemy fighters from multiple positions began concentrating fire on her as soon as she left cover. Bullets struck the ground around her feet as she ran in a zigzag pattern toward better firing position. She reached a new position approximately 80 meters closer to the enemy nest, but the improved angle still did not provide a clear shot. The machine gun crew had positioned themselves expertly, using terrain features that prevented direct engagement from any reasonable firing position. As Maria studied the tactical problem, she noticed something that changed her entire approach. The enemy position, while protected from direct fire, was vulnerable to a specific type of engagement that combined her medical training with her shooting skills. The solution was unconventional but potentially decisive. Maria realized that conventional sniper tactics would not work against the heavily protected machine gun nest. However, her medical training had taught her about pressure points and structural vulnerabilities in defensive positions. The rock formation protecting the enemy crew had a critical weakness that could be exploited with the right approach. She noticed that the enemy position relied on a large boulder, balanced precariously above the machine gun nest. Years of weathering had created stress fractures in the rock's base, and a precisely placed shot could potentially cause a catastrophic structural failure. It was an unprecedented use of sniper tactics, but their desperate situation called for creative solutions. The target was a hairline crack in the boulder's base, visible only through the high-powered scope at close range. The shot would require perfect bullet placement to exploit the existing weakness and cause the massive rock to shift position. If successful, it would crush the machine gun nest and eliminate the crew instantly. Maria lined up the most technically demanding shot of her career. The target was less than 6 inches wide at a range of 120 meters, requiring absolute precision under combat conditions. Environmental factors including wind, temperature, and her own elevated heart rate from the dangerous movement had to be calculated perfectly. Her shot struck the crack precisely as intended. For a moment nothing happened, and she feared the plan had failed. Then, with a grinding sound audible over the battlefield noise, the massive boulder began to shift. The enemy machine gunners had seconds to recognize their danger before tons of stone crashed down on their position. The destruction of the third machine gun nest opened the landing zone completely. Morrison immediately radioed the extraction helicopter that the area was clear for landing. But the enemy response to Maria's unconventional tactics was swift and overwhelming. Every surviving Taliban fighter began converging on her position. Davis had managed to drag himself to better cover during Maria's movement, but he was weakening rapidly from blood loss. His radio reports indicated that at least 30 enemy fighters were now focused solely on eliminating Maria. Recognizing that she had single-handedly disrupted their entire defensive plan, the helicopter touched down in the landing zone as planned, but Maria and Davis were still 200 meters away across terrain, now swarming with hostile forces. The other SEAL elements had successfully reached the aircraft, but extraction would be impossible until the sniper team could be recovered. Maria made a critical decision that would define her legacy in special operations. She instructed Davis to begin moving toward the helicopter, while she provided covering fire from their current position. Her plan was to hold off the enemy assault long enough for Davis to reach safety, sacrificing her own extraction if necessary. Davis refused to abandon his position, arguing that they should move together or not at all. But Maria's assessment of his condition indicated that he lacked the strength for rapid movement while she carried the heavy sniper rifle. Someone needed to stay behind and provide suppression, and she was the only one capable of effective long-range engagement. The argument ended when enemy fighters began appearing on ridgelines overlooking their position. Maria counted at least 15 fighters with direct lines of sight to their location. The tactical situation had become completely untenable, with enemy forces holding all the advantages of position and numbers. She began engaging the closest threats with rapid precision fire, using her remaining ammunition to maximum effect. Each shot eliminated an enemy fighter, but more appeared to take their place. The Taliban had committed every available fighter to preventing her escape. Recognizing that her elimination was now their primary objective, Davis managed to move approximately 50 meters closer to the helicopter before enemy fire forced him into cover. His progress was slow but steady, and Maria's covering fire was keeping the most dangerous threats suppressed. However, her ammunition was running critically low, with only 8 rounds remaining. Morrison's voice came over the radio indicating that the helicopter could not wait much longer due to fuel constraints and increasing enemy activity in the area. The pilot reported seeing additional hostile forces moving toward the landing zone from multiple directions. Time was running out for successful extraction. Maria realized that conventional covering fire would not be sufficient to suppress the enemy long enough for Davis to complete his movement. She needed a more dramatic solution that would create enough confusion and fear among the Taliban fighters to allow both of them to escape. Her medical bag contained several items that could be repurposed for tactical use. Emergency flares designed for signaling medical helicopters could create visual confusion and temporary blindness among enemy fighters using night vision equipment. Chemical heating pads could produce smoke and distraction when combined with other materials. The plan required her to abandon the protected firing position and move into completely open terrain while deploying improvised diversionary devices. It was essentially a suicide mission, but it might provide Davis with the opportunity to reach the helicopter safely. She gathered her remaining ammunition and medical supplies, preparing for what would likely be her final tactical movement of the mission. Davis watched her preparations with growing understanding of her intentions, and his protest became more urgent as he realized what she was planning. Maria ignored his objections and began her movement across the exposed terrain, carrying the sniper rifle and her improvised diversionary devices. Enemy fire immediately concentrated on her position, but she had achieved the intended effect. Every hostile fighter was now focused on her rather than Davis. The first flare detonation created a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded several enemy fighters using night vision equipment. The second flare, thrown in a different direction, convinced many fighters that there were multiple targets moving across the battlefield. Confusion spread through the enemy ranks as they attempted to engage targets that seemed to be everywhere at once. Using the chaos she had created, Maria continued moving and shooting, eliminating priority targets while drawing fire away from Davis's position. Her unconventional tactics were working, but she was rapidly running out of ammunition and diversionary materials. Davis had managed to cover another 50 meters during the distraction, but he was still too far from the helicopter for immediate extraction. The enemy was beginning to adapt to Maria's tactics, and their fire was becoming more concentrated and accurate. The final phase of the extraction would require every remaining resource and skill Maria possessed. With only 3 rounds remaining and Davis still 100 meters from the helicopter, Maria faced the most critical decision of her military career. The enemy had regrouped and was systematically closing in on both their positions. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 20 different locations, all concentrated on preventing their escape. Morrison's voice came over the radio with devastating news. The helicopter was taking increasing fire from newly arrived enemy reinforcements, and the pilot reported multiple hits on critical systems. They had perhaps 2 minutes before extraction would become impossible, leaving the entire team stranded in hostile territory. Maria made her final tactical calculation. She had 3 bullets, 20-plus enemy targets, and 2 teammates whose lives depended on her actions. Traditional marksmanship would not be sufficient. She needed to create a psychological impact that would cause mass confusion and allow for successful extraction. Her targets were the 3 enemy fighters who appeared to be coordinating the assault. These men were positioned at different points around the battlefield, directing other fighters and maintaining communication between separate groups. Their simultaneous elimination would disrupt enemy coordination and create the chaos needed for escape. The first shot eliminated a Taliban commander who was directing fire from the eastern ridge. At 380 meters, it was a challenging shot under combat conditions, but Maria's training and experience guided the bullet true. The commander's death caused immediate confusion among his subordinates, who began looking around uncertainly for new orders. Her second shot targeted a fighter with a radio, who was coordinating between different enemy groups. The 290-meter engagement was successful, severing the communication link between separated Taliban elements. Without coordination, the various groups began interfering with each other's fields of fire. The third and final shot was reserved for the most dangerous remaining threat, an enemy marksman who had been engaging the helicopter with accurate rifle fire. Maria could see him through her scope, positioned behind a rock formation approximately 350 meters away. This shot would determine whether extraction remained possible. Her final bullet found its mark, eliminating the enemy sniper and ending the most serious threat to the helicopter. The psychological impact of watching 3 key leaders eliminated by invisible, precise fire was devastating to enemy morale. Taliban fighters began abandoning their positions and seeking better cover, creating the opening Maria needed. Davis had used the distraction to cover the remaining distance to the helicopter, where SEAL team members helped him aboard. Morrison was shouting over the radio for Maria to move immediately to the aircraft, but she was still 150 meters away across terrain now swept by random, uncoordinated enemy fire. Her sniper rifle was out of ammunition, but she still carried her M4 carbine and sidearm. The movement to the helicopter would require speed rather than precision, and her medical training had prepared her for rapid movement under stress. She abandoned the heavy sniper rifle and began her final sprint toward extraction. Enemy fire erupted around her as she ran, but the lack of coordination among Taliban fighters worked in her favor. Different groups were shooting without clear target identification, and their crossfire was as dangerous to each other as it was to her. Several rounds came close, but Maria's erratic movement pattern made her a difficult target. Halfway to the helicopter, she encountered a wounded Taliban fighter who was attempting to engage her with an automatic weapon. Her combat training took over as she eliminated the threat with her carbine, while continuing to move toward extraction. The engagement demonstrated her complete transformation from medical support to combat soldier. The helicopter's engines were spinning at maximum power as she approached, with Morrison hanging out the door to provide covering fire. The aircraft was already lifting off when Maria reached the landing zone, forcing her to make a running leap onto the helicopter's deck. Strong hands pulled her aboard as the aircraft climbed rapidly away from the hostile area. As they gained altitude, Maria looked back at the battlefield where she had spent the most intense hours of her military career. The enemy positions were still visible through the helicopter's windows, but the fighters had stopped shooting and were beginning to disperse. Her precision marksmanship had completely disrupted their tactical plan and saved her teammates' lives. Davis was receiving medical treatment from another team member, but his condition had stabilized during the extraction. He looked at Maria with something approaching awe, having witnessed shooting skills that exceeded anything in his experience. The other SEALs were equally impressed by her performance under the most extreme combat conditions. Morrison officially commended her actions over the radio to headquarters, detailing how a combat medic had single-handedly eliminated an entire enemy squad and enabled successful mission extraction. The report would eventually reach the highest levels of military command and result in one of the most significant awards for valor in recent military history. The helicopter flight back to base gave Maria time to process what had occurred during the mission. She had exceeded every expectation of her role and capabilities, proving that determination and training could overcome any obstacle. Her transformation from support personnel to combat leader had happened under the most demanding circumstances possible. During the flight, Morrison briefed headquarters on the mission outcome. The primary target had escaped during the firefight, but the intelligence gathered about enemy tactics and positioning was invaluable. More importantly, the entire SEAL team had survived an engagement that could have resulted in complete mission failure and significant casualties. Davis's wounds were serious, but not life-threatening. Thanks to Maria's immediate medical intervention under fire, his shoulder would require surgery and extensive rehabilitation, but he would eventually return to full duty. The other team members had sustained minor injuries during the prolonged engagement, all of which were treatable at the forward operating base. Back at FOB Chapman, word of Maria's extraordinary performance spread quickly through the special operations community. Stories of a combat medic who had outperformed elite SEAL snipers under combat conditions seemed almost impossible to believe, but the mission's radio recordings and witness statements confirmed every detail. The official after-action report documented 17 confirmed enemy, casualties directly attributed to Maria's precision shooting. Her unconventional tactics, including the boulder collapse and diversionary techniques, were studied by tactical instructors as examples of creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. The report recommended her for immediate consideration for special operations training. 3 weeks later, Maria received orders to report to Naval Special Warfare Command for evaluation and potential assignment to advanced sniper training. The Navy SEALs had formally requested her transfer, recognizing that her unique combination of medical expertise and marksmanship skills would be invaluable for future special operations missions. Her father, watching the medal ceremony via video link from Los Angeles, saw his daughter receive the Silver Star for exceptional valor in combat. The citation specifically mentioned her actions in eliminating an entire enemy squad while providing life-saving medical care to wounded teammates. It was the highest decoration ever awarded to a female combat medic in the Afghanistan theater. Morrison, who had recovered from his minor wounds, personally presented Maria with a custom sniper rifle from the SEAL team. The weapon was engraved with the coordinates of their firefight and the inscription, "Even the SEAL snipers missed," until she dropped the entire enemy squad by herself. It would become the most treasured possession of her military career. 6 months later, Maria graduated from the Navy's most demanding sniper school, setting new records for accuracy and tactical innovation. Her instructors noted that her medical background provided unique advantages in understanding ballistics, anatomy, and stress physiology that enhanced her shooting performance beyond traditional training methods. She was subsequently assigned to a Joint Special Operations unit where her dual expertise in precision shooting and battlefield medicine made her one of the most sought-after operators in the Special Forces community. Her reputation for impossible shots and innovative tactics grew with each successful mission. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of modern warfare, Maria's actions during that desperate night in Afghanistan would be recognized as a turning point in how combat roles were defined. Her performance demonstrated that exceptional individuals could transcend traditional limitations and redefine what was possible in military operations. The mission also led to significant changes in military training protocols. Combat medics began receiving enhanced marksmanship training, while sniper schools incorporated medical training into their curricula. The integration of different military specialties became a hallmark of special operations effectiveness. Davis, after his recovery, requested assignment to Maria's unit, saying that he wanted to serve alongside the best marksman he had ever encountered. Their partnership would become legendary in special operations circles, combining his technical expertise with her innovative approach to create one of the most effective sniper teams in military history. The Taliban fighters who survived that night's engagement spread stories throughout their networks about a ghost marksman who could eliminate targets at impossible ranges and cause mountains themselves to strike down their enemies. These stories became part of the psychological warfare that helped establish coalition dominance in the region. For Maria, the recognition and career advancement were gratifying, but the most important outcome was simpler. She had proven to herself and others that courage, skill, and determination could overcome any obstacle. Her journey from the streets of East Los Angeles to the mountains of Afghanistan had culminated in a moment that defined not just her career, but her understanding of what was possible when someone refused to accept limitations. The sniper rifle that had started the night in the hands of an elite SEAL operator had ended up being wielded by a combat medic who transformed herself into one of the most effective precision shooters in military history. It was a reminder that in combat, excellence knows no boundaries and heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places.